Good to go when you
All
are.
right, well, we'll give this a whirl then. So I see some stats on officer-involved shootings here, Chief. Really over the years, for a department the size of Dayton, not a whole lot of fatal officer-involved
Right,
shootings. But each one obviously is serious in nature, the way it affects the officer. Since you became a police officer over 40 years ago, have you seen, do you think the incidence of officer-involved shootings increased? Does it seem like there are more, or did the statistics bear out that there are more, or not necessarily?
They are extremely rare events in policing across the board. Doesn't matter what agency you look at. Now, they have a tendency to happen more in large urban areas, but they are extremely rare events. They always have been extremely rare events, given the sheer volume of contacts we have with citizens. They are just extraordinarily rare.
But when they happen, there's always concern. I mean, one of the reasons I want to do this is because often we'll talk to the family member of the person killed, or you hear the other side, but other than the facts of the case, we never hear as a whole public how an officer is affected. And that's something that you're concerned about.
Always. It really depends a lot on the circumstances themselves. On the outcome, was a person even injured, or were they injured but it was non-fatal? So part of it is just the outcome of that shooting, which can have greater impact, particularly if it's fatal. It's an irrevocable act. It can't be changed. There's no recovery from it. So for those, they have, for me, the greatest concern. But anytime a police officer is in a position where they feel it is of such dire threat to them that they have to take this rare action of using lethal counterforce, that's an extraordinary event. That's an event that most police officers never experience in their entire career. So it is a threshold event in terms of it just is outside, so far outside the norm. And there's only so much preparation. So you do a whole bunch in training and conditioning and tactical training, decision making. But nonetheless, when it happens, everyone who would have to go through something like that, there's a certain sense of disbelief that what just happened, because it happens like that. It is usually seconds. When all of a sudden a threat is recognized, and that it's the lethality of it, and then the ability to respond quickly enough. Seconds. It happens in seconds in most cases.
Talk a little bit about the procedure after there's an officer-involved shooting. So I know there's an internal investigation, then eventually goes to grand jury, but talk about that process, because I don't think the average person really knows what goes on after a shooting.
Well, first it's a homicide investigation. So it's treated like any other intentional death caused to another, which is what a homicide is. And the question is, for any homicide, by the way, is it justifiable or is it a criminal act? So there's cases, obviously, where citizens take action and take another's life that's considered to be justifiable self-defense. We have incidents like that, not necessarily every year, but some cases we have multiple incidents like that in a year. So the first was treated as a homicide investigation. So homicide squad responds, you have crime scene detectives responding, so you have our forensic service units basically processing all the evidence. It's a coroner's case, so there's an autopsy and various exams done of the body and wound paths and all those kind of things. So it is a very intricate process. And the coroner determines means and manner of death, and yet we determine who caused that death. And then the prosecutor receives the completed investigations, both ours as well as the coroner, with all the lab reports that may come with us. There could be DNA with that, there could be ballistics tests that were conducted, there could be fingerprints. I mean, all that information goes to the prosecutor's office, and then the prosecutors examine that evidence. In the case of officer-involved shootings, they will go in front of a grand jury. In some cases of self-defense for citizens, a three-prosecutor panel may say, no, this is self-defense, this is not going to a grand jury. But police cases almost invariably go to a grand jury process. So there's a whole nother review done by citizens of this community who review that evidence and are instructed on the law and to make a determination whether that was a lawful act or not. So that's the criminal part of it. Once that's completed, then there's an administrative investigation, because it's no longer an issue of legality. It's a matter of where policy and procedure and training followed. So is there any administrative action that needs to be taken if it was deemed that policies were violated, procedures were violated, improper weapon was used that wasn't authorized, whether training was adequately followed. And so there's that review is conducted, and it may also result in additional training for an officer. It may result in policy change. It may result in change in training, because we realize now there's a circumstance that we hadn't experienced before that we have to train personnel to be potentially prepared to respond to. So all of that's part of this process.
By and large, most officer-involved shootings are justified, are deemed justified.
Right.
There's no criminal charges brought.
Correct.
But there still remains an effect on the officer, even when they're cleared, when they're justified. You can say all day long, they did the right thing, but you've witnessed what's happened with officers after they've been involved. What kind of effects does this have on officers that maybe the public doesn't even realize?
Well, it certainly depends. I'll go back on the circumstances themselves. How volatile it was, how sudden it was. I mean, there's a lot that goes into just the circumstances. Clearly the outcome is relevant. The officer's experience over time, particularly if they have seen other colleagues go through these events, they may be better prepared. Have officers, and this is the area that I'm really trying to focus on this stage of my career, have we adequately given officers coping skills to begin to self-regulate, number one, the physiological distress that happens in extreme survival situations, but along with also the emotional and cognitive impacts of that. Because we're just not a physical body, where there's, our emotions and our thought are all linked to our physiology. We're one, as a body-mind, sometimes it's called a mind-body. So have we adequately prepared officers to utilize a specific skill set to self-regulate? So all of that comes into play, but I have seen officers literally weep at the scene. I've talked to officers after a shooting over a period of months, that every time they would talk about it, they cried. It particularly in cases where, again, the outcome is fatal. So it can be very, very distressful for police officers. They can become distraught and have challenge functioning just with everyday life, carrying the weight of their action.
And you've seen officers who've left after being involved in fatal shootings.
Beautiful, incredible human beings and very professional police officers, but they could not do one more. Yeah.
It's just I'm trying to think what I wanted to ask you next. Okay, you were talking about how to regulate breathing, so that's part of why you do yoga.
That's why I do what I do.
Yeah, that's why you're. Yeah, so this is unique, because I don't think that, certainly not when you started your career would that have been done, and I'm sure that a lot of other departments don't do that. But what is the purpose of you going to the academy and practicing yoga with the recruits?
First is to introduce them to a way of movement, breath, and awareness that is not something they will typically experience in the academy. They'll go through tactical training, they'll go through decision making, they'll go through conditioning, they'll go through aerobic training. But have they been taught, particularly, give you an example, they go to a call, maybe it's a person with a gun call, and all of a sudden they have a physiological response. I've been there. I mean, in fact, the biggest aha for me early in my career is that there was a call of that nature, and when I got there, nothing was going on of significance. I mean, there wasn't the threat that was proposed in the call that I received, a person with a gun. But literally, I had the awareness in that moment. I was fortunate that I did. So after we addressed whatever needed to be addressed, but that's what was happening on the inside. My heart rate had skyrocketed, and there was not even a threat there. If there's not a way, number one, to prevent that rapid escalation, particularly in a case where there's not even a threat present yet, it was just the inference or information that there was a threat, but it didn't turn out to be true. If there's not a way to begin to self-regulate, I realized in that moment, if I don't do something to manage that, I'm never going to make it through 25 years. I won't make it physically. I'm not going to make it. I'm going to have some kind of cardiac event or something. So I knew at that point I needed to do something to manage how I responded to that kind of potential call and better regulate myself. But just say also you do respond to an incident and it is pretty intense for whatever. It could be minor use of force or an intense domestic disturbance where you think, wow, I may have to use force here. This looks like it's going to go ugly, and I've been in those cases too where I'm just certain it's going to erupt into violence, but then it doesn't. Well, my whole physiology is prepared now. It's been ramped up to do what's called flight or fight. Well, we're not going to run away. We're going to hang in there, and if we have to use counterforce, we're going to use counterforce. Well, say that situation's resolved, I don't have to use any counterforce. We're able to get, take whatever action needs to be action. There's no conflict or violence. But I have to go now to the next call. Do I take that ramped up physiology into my next call? And am I going to potentially overreact because I am still reacting from my previous call? How do we regulate that? Well, the fastest way to do that is through regulated breathing. So I wasn't taught that, 40 years ago. I wasn't taught at 30 or 20. Well, 25, we'll say. But it wasn't relevant to policing that I learned this, right? This is for my own personal exploration. And for me, 25 years ago, an exploration of a number of different self-regulation approaches, because I was suffering from depression. I was in pain every day, and I wanted to get out of pain. And talk therapy was not particularly helpful for me, and many advances have been made in therapeutic approaches and medications, etc. But I wasn't interested in medication. But I was in pain every day. I was in distress. There was emotional distress. I needed a way out of that. And I was a very disciplined person physically. I was a martial artist, I was a power lifter. None of that prevented me from having depression, I might point out. So I came across a PBS series called Healing in the Mind by Bill Moyers, the TV journalist. And he interviewed someone called John Kabat-Zinn at the time, who was involved with the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And he had convinced doctors to have him work with patients for which Western medicine had no remedy. They still had chronic conditions. They were still in, oftentimes daily pain and distress. Yet Western medicine had nothing to offer. There was no cure. Medications potentially had to be withdrawn because people were developing tolerance. Now what? Where's my help? So John Kabat-Zinn taught them a gentle form of yoga, a mindfulness meditation, and something called a body scan as part of something called MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And the results of that were rather phenomenal, that many people had reduction of their symptomology. Some had complete remediation of symptoms. They got better merely through applying these very ancient practices. Well, that was a sell for me, so I went out and bought a yoga book. I had dabbled with yoga in my teens and my early 20s. But I went out and bought a book, I opened it, I just started practicing. And it didn't take very long at all. I realized I had a day without pain. I thought, wow, I wonder if I can get 2 of those together. Before I knew it, it was a week without pain and a month without pain. So I found that this was an incredibly powerful way to self-regulate, to begin to emerge from the emotional and physical pain. I never understood depression could be painful physically. To get out of that distress and to have good days, and good days connected, and good days that lasted for a month. So for me, it was the key. It was the way out. And I'm not suggesting that individuals, do not pursue the services of mental health practitioners. Much has changed in 25 years. So first thing I would say, if someone is struggling with what they think is a mental health condition, seek help. Go see a mental health provider. Get the help you need. That's an act of strength, not weakness. With that said, we also know that what happens when the next appointment isn't, for another week and you're having a tough day, or it's 2 in the morning. Who do I call or talk to? Now, maybe some folks have really good friends they can call at 2 in the morning, but maybe the options of a social support are very limited at 2 a.m. Now what do I do? Do I just suffer through the night? Do I lose a whole night's sleep? Do I remain in distress for who knows how long? There are literally ways for people to work with their physiology, work with breathing, work with awareness to help better regulate with that internal churning, the physiological distress, and come to a place which I call a sense of balance, peace, and ease in the body. That's what I found could occur through these practices. And it didn't take a lot of practice, interestingly. Now, part of it may be because I have done these things for so long, but I literally can get a benefit out of a 5-minute or 10-minute practice early in the morning that changes the barometer for me, my internal state of, how calm am I, how reactive am I, how kind am I to the people around me? I think it's pretty important,
Yeah.
Nobody wants the grumpy boss to show up, So I found that it can have a really, really profound long-term effect through my entire day by just a simple practice in the morning. So that's why I do what I
you want
do.
to share that with
Exactly
the
so.
officers and say this is an option for you going
Yeah.
forward, because you're
Right.
probably going to need coping skills.
I tell them that. I told the recruits that, last week. I said, there will be a day, and I said, there will be a time, and it will likely be multiple times in your career, you're going to experience an event that's going to rock your world. And you're going to need resources to help balance that, to help navigate through that. Not only, like I say, social support, and I'm going to go back to mental health support, all those things are important. But I would really prefer you to have a skill set that when and if, not really if, when that comes, if you're in a business at any number of years at all, these are going to happen. When it happens, that you have got something immediately in hand that you can use to kind of come back to a better place of balance, and then go get the support and resources that you need, right? But there's something available now. And if we can cultivate these skills prior to, we may find that, we still experience distress. I mean, I'm not pain-free. I'm not, emotional-free, if you will. I mean, when things are sad, I grieve. I do. I mean, it's like I'm not immune from any of this. But there's a certain way to navigate through those experiences in a way that's kinder and more skillful than probably many people are able to do. It was something cultivated over time. So I just think that it's so important for public safety personnel, not just police, to have these skills before the crisis occurs. It's the worst time, because I've been there, to develop these skills in acute crisis. It's the worst time to try to develop them, which is why I'm so passionate about cultivating these abilities, these skills on the front end, early on, and practicing them over time throughout one's career to take some of the severity out of some of the experiences they will have, and to still give them a skill set when they find it's still just beyond their ability to cope, that they get the resources, the support, friends, family, mental health service providers, etc., but also have something they can do for themselves.
And I know your department also sends officers to Kathy Platoni. You have to see a psychologist sometimes within hours. I think after Oregon District, she was talking to them within hours. Because that's important too. They need to talk about it. They need to talk about how they're feeling and
Yeah.
help them cope, even when they know they were clearly justified, even when they've gotten accolades for their actions,
Right.
it still can be a very tough thing emotionally.
Yeah, we come on this job because we want to help people and we want to protect life. We don't ever want to have to take life, although we know that that's a possibility, that is an inherent risk in this profession, that we, in order to save and protect, we may have to take that awful and ultimate action of using lethal force. We know that. And if someone has not accepted that reality, they're probably in the wrong profession, because it's not time to figure that out in the moment when you have to make the decision. One has to know that they're capable of doing that, even though all of their motivation is to do anything else but. It just may be required because it's the most compassionate and necessary thing that's needed. And we certainly saw a very graphic example of that very recently in this community. So they have to be prepared for that, but then you have to be able to live with the consequence of that enormously weighty decision.
Yeah. Do you think, what's the one thing you would like the public to know? I covered the police department for years. I know a lot of police officers.
Anybody you want to name?
Nobody I can think of off the top of my head. But I've seen. I remember so many criticism, lawsuits, protests.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot. And does the general public understand what police officers must go through after they've been involved in a shooting?
They have no idea. The vast majority have no idea. They really don't. And when they take time out to actually find out, like those who go through the Citizen Police Academy, or that do a ride-along, wow, do those views change, and change at times radically and almost instantaneously. I remember we had about 8 years ago, we had a group of citizens who went through a mini crisis intervention team training to learn about mental health conditions and people's behavior that may be indicative of mental health crises, and so they can identify those early on and get the appropriate, I keep on going back to that, the appropriate mental health resources in place to help their loved ones or their friends or their neighbors. But I remember one woman who said, it was shocking in a way, but she said she went on a ride along like 4 hours, and she said, "Wow, the way that person talked to that police officers, if I had a gun, I'd have shot him." And I thought, wow, I couldn't believe she said that, but I mean that was her reaction to the way a police officer was treated and how offensive she found it to be, and it would prompt her to. I don't think she would really have done that, but I mean that's what she said.
She was incensed that she saw an officer disrespected.
Right, and she may have also perceived that behavior as threatening too, by the way. So the citizens go through Citizen Police Academy. Oh, when they have to, or in that situation where they have to make a shoot, don't shoot decision, and then suddenly they make the wrong one. Wow, is that like a wake-up call? Because they think they're making the right decision until it's pretty clear the threat wasn't there. Why did you shoot? So until citizens get a little bit deeper understanding of the true environment where police officers function, and what they call so I think the Supreme Court said they were volatile and rapidly evolving, unpredictable circumstances, right? We just don't know what's happening. It's so quick. Things just spiral out of control very, very quickly. Until they have a sense of it in a very, very threatening way and unpredictable way. Yeah. Until they really experience that, just a taste of that, they have no idea. Now, I have to say there are some individuals who are, the media did an extraordinary job some years ago. I believe may have been right after the Ferguson, Missouri shooting happened to Michael Brown. And the media went and got some of those who are very critical advocates, very public critical critics of police and advocates for community and justice, etc., put them through these scenarios, and the large reversal in their view of many of these situations was phenomenal. So I looked at this situation and I thought, Everyone said, brothers and sisters, if the police tell you to do something, do it. I mean, one person was Quanell X, who had been very vocal down in the Southwest. I think it may have been Houston, about what actions of police officers. But once going through those experiences, changed his view radically. I would say radically. Now, he said also in the same breath, we think police officers, and they should, right? Who had police officers done something wrong, we're going to advocate. But if we respond too quickly in judgment, we may make things worse. We may do harm. So we really have to be kind of thoughtful about this. So this experience of going through these shoot, don't shoot scenarios, based on real events that have happened to police officers, was a large shift in how he saw the role of police officers, what police officers do. So that was one of the most phenomenal things. And I had great courage, by the way, for the advocates to put themselves in a police officer's shoes and to risk or to reevaluate, how they view what police do and how they do it and why they do it. So I give great, kudos to those. And wasn't the other one, was a Reverend Maupin was another who had the courage to challenge perhaps, or at least critically examine their views and see, do I understand this as well as I need to? And both came away with almost identical comments afterwards about the need to be more balanced in one's view of these events, and certainly get the details and to not rush to judgment.
If only everybody could take that training, that would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah.